uniquely susceptible to sleep deprivation. Okay? All right, in children, the optimal amount of sleep, it's not just about, okay, my child gets 10 hours of sleep, they're 8 years old, they're fine. Because if they're going to sleep at 10, as opposed to 8, when their brain is saying it's time to go to sleep, their sleep is not good. It's not optimal. It's not just about the amount, but it's the timing of the sleep that's important. Again, it's based on that circadian rhythm. Okay? So if you're sleeping at the wrong time, guess what? It's not going to be restorative. It's not going to be as good. How many of you have caught your second wind? You know what that is, right? Mm-hmm. You've done that before. My guess is you probably didn't sleep very well that night. What happens is catching your second wind means you sort of passed that time when your body wanted to go, when your brain wanted to go to sleep. Now your timing's off, and it'll take a day before you can get back in rhythm, so to speak. Now, how do we know the timing is correct? Well, you can do it the scientific way: maximum concentration of the hormone melatonin and minimum core body temperature. We're not going to measure that. How do you know your child's getting the right amount of sleep and the timing of their sleep is correct? When there is no daytime sleepiness and no dysfunction that's related to sleep. That's how you know. A good example is if your child wakes on their own. You know, how much sleep are people supposed to get every day? Kids. You can go on any website you want. You can go, whoever you want, American Academy of Pediatrics, American Psychological Association, this is the National Sleep Foundation. They will show, this is about the same wherever you go. Hey, newborns need a lot of sleep. Makes sense, right? We're now, here's where the Spring Garden Waldorf kids start, right? Right around here in the nursery and in kindergarten. Look how much they need. That's half their day. And then you go into, here's the general population, so to speak, elementary school into middle school. Adolescents still need 9 to 10, give or take. How many hours do you think they're actually getting? Probably not that many, right? Okay. I'm going to skip over a couple of these slides because I want to talk a little bit about adolescents. Now, adolescents are weird for a lot of reasons. Okay, they're wonderful, but they're just unique. Adolescence is a time, it's really unlike any other time in development, right? Now, one of the reasons why is because teenagers don't ascribe to early to bed, early to rise. That's not how they're made. And physiologically, based on more recent research, we know that isn't the way they're made. It's not just that they are moody and they're grumpy. I mean, they're that, but there's a reason why. 90% of parents in the United States believe their child gets enough sleep. This is particularly true for young children, but also for teenagers as well. 60%, however, of high schoolers report that they're sleepy, extremely sleepy during the day. A quarter of them admit that their grades have dropped because of it. These are probably underestimations as well. And then 20 to 33% are falling asleep in class at least once per week. That's one of the questions I always ask kids. Do you fall asleep in class sometimes? Yeah. People don't fall asleep in class because they're bored. People fall asleep in class because they're tired. Okay? The boredom just allows that sleepiness to actually come to the forefront. Okay? In the 1990s, we found that the natural tendency for teenagers is to stay up late and wake up later in the morning. On average, 2 hours later at night. And they, of course, want to sleep later. That's just kind of how things change for them. When you're going through adolescence, you're going through a lot of brain development. You're going through this period of intense synaptogenesis. And because of that, things are a little different for teenagers. Now, in Minneapolis, they did a study based on Mary Karskaden's work. And what she found was that, based on her research, she encouraged and got the Minneapolis Public School District to change the starting time of 7 high schools from 7:15 to 8:40. They found improvements in all of these areas. Now, can you imagine if your child got that much more sleep? I know my 10-year-old, he's not a teenager, my 10-year-old would do better if he could sleep until 7:30 instead of getting him up at 6:45 or 7, because that's when he wakes up naturally. It doesn't work out that way because we got to get him going and get him to school. Are the hallmark characteristics of pre-adolescence and adolescence, as in moodiness, depression, risk-taking, whatever other label you want to give, Is it just a symptom of chronic sleep deprivation? Something to ask yourself. All right, what causes sleep problems? Light. Light's a big one. Again, I'll talk about our 10-year-old. He has had a kind of a chronic, off and on issue with kind of fear around the nighttime time for a variety of reasons. And we've tried all sorts of things. We have a beautiful salt lamp that we've used in his room that gives up that nice soft light. We've used candles, and candles work well. You know, they work for our 4-year-old. He sleeps better now than he ever did before because we keep it dark. You know, when it's time for bed, the lights are out. You might have the door open a little bit. He listens to a story, but there's no light. Light, I remember that's that little organ, that little structure in the brain. As soon as it senses light, it wants to keep you awake. Resisting the urge to fall asleep. You know, don't want to fall asleep, don't want to fall asleep. This is particular in teenagers and adults who want to stay up for, you know, you've got something to work on, you know, because you've got an assignment due tomorrow, or you want to text your friends and they're going to text you at 11 o'clock. Well, you hit that second wind, and then it makes it more difficult to fall asleep. I know for myself, when I hit that second wind, I know I hit it around 11:30. At 11:30, I feel it, and then I can't fall asleep. My legs are restless. You know, I can't fall asleep. What are some of these other environmental distractors? Well, TV, video game, phone, loud noise, or any kind of noise, right? Some of the kids that I worked with up in Cleveland, they would talk about how they could hear gunshots. I mean, that's an extreme. But how about just being in a house where people are up? You know, and you can hear all those sounds, or the walls are thin or whatever. That keeps people up because, you know, it makes you resist, and it keeps you. It's not relaxing. Stress, right? If you've got, I mean, I know I presented hundreds of times, but I was a little stressed out about this last night, so I didn't fall asleep right away. It took me a little bit, you know. So I'm tired today. Liver dysfunction. Liver has been implicated more so. That's more anthroposophical, more homeopathy, naturopathy, as opposed to kind of the traditional, the mainstream. I hate to say mainstream, but sort of the Western medicine view. But liver dysfunction, and we'll talk about this a little bit more. Because the liver, remember, the liver stores up sugar, right? It brings all that sugar in and says, okay, body, it's time to go to sleep. If there's dysfunction in the liver, that sugar stays out there. Or if there's too much sugar in the body because of the diet, liver can't bring in enough sugar. Okay? And then it causes problems with the liver, with glucose storage. Pain or illness, obviously, that can keep you up. Food or drink. Caffeine's a big one, certainly. And then medication. The main medication that keeps kids up is what? Ritalin, stimulant medication, yeah. So anyone who's diagnosed with ADHD, any child who's diagnosed with ADHD, they're usually put on 2 medicines. The first one is a stimulant. What's the second one? No. Well, it's a hypertensive medication. So it's called usually clonidine is the one that they're put on, and it's an adult hypertensive medication. It helps calm you down. So you've got the stimulant that wakes you up, and then you have to have this medication that calms you down. Okay. Imagine if you're doing that and your child doesn't have ADHD. We'll get into that. The liver. This was fascinating. My wife has taught me some about kind of how the liver functions and how important it is. And then I got some work from or some articles from Amy, and that also, you know, the liver was really highlighted in one of the readings. Now, if you're staying up late, if you're not going to sleep when you should, it forces the liver to break down glycogen or glucose. You know, causes letting sugar out into the body instead of storing it, which means now you don't have energy for the next day. You know, that was stored up for the next day. That's not there anymore. When you're losing sleep, it makes you hungry, and it decreases the hormone that suppresses appetite. Okay? And then the lack of sleep causes increased adrenal effort. More specifically, the release of cortisol. Cortisol is a stress hormone, and what that does is it impairs immunity. It starts to break down tissues and cells. Often leads to irritability. Okay, so you've got this stressing of the liver and stressing of the adrenals. Effects of sleep deprivation. You can look at this on your handout. This one is important. Symptoms similar to ADHD. One of the reasons why I chose sleep to talk about is because it is, like I said, it's often misdiagnosed, and it's predominantly misdiagnosed as ADHD. And then you're putting kids on the stimulant medication, which then causes more sleep problems. Sleep debt, really quickly. Look, you can't bounce back from not sleeping enough. It doesn't happen automatically. You go into sleep debt. It's like having credit card debt. If it's one night, you're going to pay it back that night. Maybe it's an hour. Maybe you need an hour extra of sleep. Maybe it's less. If it's chronic, it's many days, the buildup of this sleep debt. And you're going to have to pay it back. You may not pay it back when you want to. You may fall asleep in class. You may fall asleep when you're driving. But your body needs it needs that sleep. Okay? So it's kind of like credit card debt. Eventually you have to pay it. Now, some of the school problems that are associated with sleep loss. And again, you're not getting glucose into the brain. Okay? That affects a specific part of the brain more than any others, and that's that prefrontal cortex, which is set up. The prefrontal cortex, its main job is goal-directed behavior, executive functions, problem solving, strategizing, organizing, sustaining mental effort, impulse control. All of those things that you need, it's not just about, school isn't just about learning how to read, but it's knowing when are you supposed to read, when are you supposed to stop talking, how are you supposed to learn this, how are you supposed to learn that. It's sort of the higher order skills that allow memory to happen, or allow attention to happen, switching from one thing to the next, that sort of thing. Attention and concentration are affected in school. Kids who don't get enough sleep, they'll come to school and they don't pay attention very well, right? They're tired, they're distracted, they're thinking about 10 other things that have nothing to do with school. Motor skills. And when I say motor skills, I'm not talking about running and walking necessarily, but really fine motor skills. I would imagine if we were to go into Mrs. Lim's class and watch kids who are sleep deprived, watch them try and make some of those, try and finger knit or try and do some of the knitting they do, my guess is they'd be pretty clumsy, or more clumsy than they usually are. Working memory is affected. Working memory is the ability to take information and keep it online, like a computer, okay? You hold that information online while you manipulate it. So a simple example would be if I set a number string like 8279, I want you to say it back to me, but say it backwards. You have to hold 8279 online, and then you have to turn it around in your head. Okay, or if I gave you a shape, and I said, I want you to tell me what would it look like if it was turned 90 degrees. Your ability to turn that in space is partly due to working memory. There was a study done here, individuals who were tested when they were well rested, and then they were tested after 4 days of sleep deprivation. On the final test, the average working memory span for the sleep-deprived group dropped nearly 40%. That's a lot.
It's huge.
So that's almost half of the information that they had learned previously. And then information processing speed, your ability to process simple information and complex information quickly and accurately. It's slowed down. If you're tired, you can't process things very fast, right? And if these two things are impaired, the ability to learn information is going to be considerably impaired. I'm not even talking about attention, back here. If you don't pay attention, you can't learn, bottom line. All right, Sada at Tel Aviv, he and his colleagues tested 77 fourth graders and sixth graders. Told some of them to get the same amount of sleep, told others of them to get half an hour less of sleep per night. That's all. And what they did is after those 3 days, they tested them using a test that's similar to the Wechsler scales, which is what we use here. It's an IQ test. What they found was that they ended up having an hour difference of sleep. It was equivalent to 2 grade levels drop. What that means is that the sixth graders who had 30 minutes less of sleep per night performed like fourth graders on the tests.
Wow.
And that's from 3 days. And this has been replicated So not just by SATA, but other individuals in the United States, other researchers. It doesn't take much. Especially when if you've got kids who aren't used to losing their sleep, they're going to be affected by some loss of sleep. Now, social, so that's the school-based problem. Yes?
I think you missed something very important. I'm shocked to see that it can be cumulative and irreversible
Oh, yes.
if left unchecked. That's
Yes.
amazing.
Because, again, if you think of sleep as a problem, you are in the minority. Most people think of sleep, I mean, again, most parents, 90% of parents in this country think their kids get enough sleep. They're not. Why? Because we as parents, unless you're in my field, or unless you're in a field where sleep is considered, you're not told that they're getting enough sleep, typically, okay? Pediatricians, I'm assuming, as a whole, maybe they're not disseminating that information. Or maybe as parents, you're not hearing that information. Now, again, there's nothing, it's not like you have, we know that 9 hours of sleep is correct. We know there's a range of normal sleep for kids. But a lot of kids aren't even in that. Sleep is is thought of as secondary. My kid's acting out. My kid's not learning. That's where the focus is. The quiet behavior of sleep is kind of put off in the corner. It's like the child who is quiet and withdrawn often isn't paid attention to. It's the child who's bouncing off the walls, right? That's why ADHD is diagnosed as often as it is. So yes, thank you for pointing that out. Now, social problems. So we've got obviously we have the academic issues, the learning issues. How about the social problems? Well, lack of sleep can make you, what you said, irritable, cranky, which affects your ability to interact with others. What do kids learn in school? Yes, they learn reading. Yes, they learn math. But they learn how to interact with each other, right? It's like you're put in here as a child, and you got to be in here, and you have to interact with these individuals. And to be successful, you have to be able to, generally your mood has to match what their mood is. Generally, you've got to be able to give and take. You've got to be able to share. You can't be irritable. Those sorts of things. Kids when they are irritable, when they are cranky, when they can't pay attention, they struggle socially. Okay. In kids, this issue is particularly true about the irritability and crankiness because kids they're still learning how to regulate their emotions. That's a frontal lobe skill, and again, we know the frontal lobe is severely affected by sleep deprivation. Okay. These two things are very interesting. You've got sleep is directly correlated with obesity. For a variety, we already talked about what the liver does and how that affects the liver, and that can lead to obesity. What happens when a child is obese, or if they develop diabetes, or if they develop heart disease, or if they develop some other physical disability? Well, that leads to identification with that particular disorder, and then they get separated from their peers. Either they choose to separate because of lower self-esteem, self-concept, they can't run because they're overweight, or they're forced by their peers. They're ostracized. Okay? So what's also interesting is that sleep deprivation affects one particular structure in the brain, the hippocampus, more so than the amygdala. The hippocampus is kind of in charge of consolidating positive or neutral memories. The amygdala, negative memories. The hippocampus function is considerably impaired by sleep deprivation, much more so than the amygdala. And so what's interesting is that kids who are chronically sleep deprived, they tend to identify more with negative memories. They have fewer positive memories. Okay. All right, quickly, sleep disorders. I don't need to spend a lot of time on these. The ones you typically see in kids are insomnia. You do see some sleep apnea. If they're overweight, you see obstructive sleep apnea. These parasomnias, we kind of talked about the night terror, the sleepwalking. So a dysomnia means it's a problem with falling asleep or waking up. Parasomnia, things are happening while the person is sleeping. Okay. I'm just going to go over ADHD because we're really running low on time. In terms of ADHD, about 9.5% to 10% of children in the United States have been diagnosed with ADHD. That ranges anywhere from 5% to 14%, give or take. Okay. Since 2003, so from 2003 to 2007, that increased by 22%. As in parents saying, yes, I've been told my child has ADHD, they've been diagnosed. Now, the fascinating thing here is that we adults think that kids act like us when they're tired, but they don't. And as in fact, what happens is, we know when we're tired because we're sluggish, right? I mean, we might be a little irritable, but we're sluggish. we're kind of hypoactive. Okay, if you looked at our brains with a PET scan, you'd see it's kind of asleep. It's not very active in terms of metabolism. With kids, it's the exact opposite. Generally speaking, you can all speak, for your own kids. But what do you see? They tend to speed up. They get hyperactive, right? Oh, that child has ADHD because they're hyperactive. You see how easy that was? That's what happens day after day after day. Oftentimes, this says sometimes, that's oftentimes confused. Sleep deprivation is often confused with ADHD. Now, kids with ADHD do